Dear God and Heavenly Father, we bow our heads this morning, acknowledging your Lordship over our lives, acknowledging the fact that we always need to tap into your wisdom. The same way you blessed Joseph, the same way you blessed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego of wisdom is the same way, Lord, we humbly request from wisdom from you. We do recognize the many challenges our nation is facing and recognize that both as individuals and as a collective we have a role to play to make Malawi a better place for all of us. Thank you that we can pray and invite your participation among us this morning in the name of Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Without much ado this morning, allow me to invite the anchor, Mr. Chawezi Banda, to come forward and start the panel discussion. Thank you. And this discussion will take us 1 hour. And I'm mentioning this so that the anchor is quite aware of the time. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I know it was a very long night yesterday night. You were treated to something good. I was told. I was just arriving by then. I would have loved if I was with you, but unfortunately, I arrived a bit late, so I was tired. I needed to put myself together for this event and finalize my preparations. But otherwise, we're good to go. Like you have heard, my name is Chawezi Banda. I work with MIPS Television. I'm glad to be part of this particular event, and I hope my contribution and the contribution of the panelists will be quite useful to all of you, and the impact that perhaps you so wish to achieve out of this will be realized. We have been in politics for quite some time. 10 years is enough. We have read a lot of books in terms of the influence of politics in awarding of contracts. That is why perhaps MIPS decided to engage me to deliver this particular panel discussion together with all the panelists. But otherwise, I am very glad to be here for this event. Without much ado, allow me to call to the front, beginning with Mr. Loti Tonzi, as he has already been announced or introduced to you by the moderator. Mr. Loti Tonzi, please take to the floor as the first of our panelists. As he takes his seat, allow me also to invite Dr. Feston Kaupa as another panelist for this session. Please, again, put your hands together for Mr. Noel Lipipa, a politician and a member of parliament. We cannot discuss the influence of politics in the award of contracts without representation of politicians. It would be quite unfair. We need to get their side of the story as to what exactly happens. That is why we decided to involve them, so that people should understand. Put your hands together for Mr. Noel. And lastly, allow me to invite Mr. Jeke. Mr. Jeke, yes, Mr. Jeke, he is also a procurement specialist. Please put your hands together for me. Don't hang me for forgetting your first name. He's Mr. Edward Jeke, just for purposes of records. As you have heard, we have got an hour to dissect and digress this topic. The topic is dealing with the influence of politics in the award of contracts. What it means is we have a problem. We have got a problem which is called the influence of politics in the award of contracts. So we cannot discuss this topic without firstly understanding what this influence by politics actually means when it comes to the award of contracts. To set the scene, allow me to engage Dr. Feston Kauba as a procurement specialist to give us an overview of what it means when we say the influence of politics in the award of contracts. Dr. Kauba, what do we mean when we talk about the influence of politics in the award of contracts?
Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
Political influence of awarding contracts. I will be talking about this from the perspective of awards of contract, particularly in the pharmaceutical sector, because that's where I'm coming from. Now, my understanding, by the way, let me make a disclaimer that what I've been talking about are my personal opinions and not those of the Central Medical Stores Trust. My understanding of political influence, and especially the word influence, if you check your dictionary, would mean impact, control, direct. And then when we're talking about this as being political influence, it means this is control, impact, that directly comes from politicians. And I'm glad that I'm sitting next to my brother here, who is a politician. So how does this come about? Political influence comes about because politicians have got the power and they can control. And where do the politicians derive this power from? Politicians occupy an elected office. And we, some of us sitting here, are the ones that elect politicians into their elected offices of being politicians. And having been elected into those offices, we give them responsibilities. And when it comes to award of contracts, we are talking about appropriation of national resources in the national budget. And if they have the power to allocate the resources through the national budget, they get the control. However, let's not forget that by being elected in that office, they are meant to represent us. That's where the dilemma comes from. These are elected people that occupy elected offices from which they are expected to represent their constituents or constituencies. So political influence comes from that power which these officers have, the control that they will have on the people that they elected. And how do we allow this to happen? Moderator, perhaps that should be my next phase. But that's where political influence is derived from. Thank you very much.
Welcome, Mr. Dr. Feston Kauba. He has set the scene. He has given us the overview of what it means when we talk about political influence. One thing that I've picked from his response, without wasting your time, is the highlight to say, how are politicians able to influence the awarding of contracts? They're able to do that because they occupy public offices. The public offices into which they are either appointed or elected into. So it has reminded me of something which was said by one great Greek philosopher who said, it is in the very nature of man to hang the small thieves, but elect great ones into public office. You understand what happens? That's what exactly is happening. The people that you elect into public office, entrusted power to do what we need from them. That's what exactly they do. So we choose to hang a Moses stealer, but we elect a great thief into public office. Let's continue. I want to get to Mr. Moti Tonzi. You are a consultant. You have occupied before the position of Inspector General of Police. There have been good episodes, bad episodes when it comes to the influence of politics. I remember before Malawi enacted the Political Finance Act or the Political Parties Act, a lot was said when it came to the issue of contracts being abused and misused. Do you have anything that quickly comes to mind that time to say, when you were at the helm of matters with the Malawi Police, anything to do with complaints, whether from private individuals or from government or from civil society organizations, that came to your attention to say, there has been some kind of shady deal somewhere relating to the influence of politics. Does anything come quickly to your mind relating to that particular effect? Before we get into the real substantive matters.
Well, not necessarily, since I was dealing with crime,
Yes.
rather than dealing with corruption. But picking up from what my counterpart has said, and even just listening to politicians, even at the current time, the major question that comes into my mind is, was he or she supposed to have made that decision? They have been elected to that position, right? But is the decision they are making at this particular time supposed to be the decision they made, or that decision should be made at a lower level or at a higher level? So you find that we are faced with a situation where both those of us that work as public servants and those that work as politicians have to retrace the source of power for our positions to make particular decisions. What comes into mind more particularly for the public servant that makes them the greatest weak, to be the most vulnerable in the process, is the safeguards that the public servant has to have the ability to say no to political influence.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lonti. I want to get now to Mr. Edward Jeke, our procurement specialist. When we talk about influencing of awarding of contracts by politics, certainly it means some protocols, some processes have been abused, or some corners have been cut in that particular respect. What are the protocols that are needed, or the processes that must be followed in doing the due diligence that is required in the award of contracts? Technically, I want to understand that. To say here, politics hasn't played a part, but we have really followed the right path in the award of contracts. Technically, what are the protocols or processes that are required in doing that particular due diligence? Quickly, Mr. Jeke.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator, and thank you very much, my distinguished colleagues. Well, my response is a build up on what my fellow panelists have already stated. But directly, let me speak to the fact that the influence we are talking about is about swaying the minds of those processing procurement transactions in favor of specific individuals, specific bidders of the politician's interest. Now, it is important that we should understand that procurement is a process, and the process has so many principles that must be followed, that must be respected.
Now, in following these principles, usually the winner or the awardee of a contract is determined without any influence, and that is the procurement outcome that is required. But when it comes to political influence, the politicians try and sway that kind of decision making so that it doesn't point to the one that the system should have realized, but to the one that they want. Now, usually, it is not just for purposes of doing that. It is because they have an interest to satisfy. And this is a phenomenon that we shall always live with in procurement. Politicians who come and go, they are one and the same. They have an influence which they will want to exert in any procurement process so that they gain from it. Let me remind the audience that one renowned president, Dr. Bagimus, once said, Amanda Bambo, not in the business. Politics is an investment. So people go into politics so that they can earn something. And that something is, in most cases, as we see in Africa, about getting business contracts. It can be for themselves or their close allies or somebody they want. So basically, it's about influencing for them to have a gain out of it, rather than the process allowing it to move its full course to realize somebody fairly, transparently, and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jackie. I want to get to Honorable Noel Pipa, our parliamentarian, and of course the politician in the House. Perhaps the only active politician in the House. You have been mentioned, you have been put in the spotlight. We are here discussing the very scope within which you trade as a politician. You have been mentioned, and you have heard the aspects which have been highlighted. He has finished by saying, Dr. Muluzi once said, that in the business. Honorable Pipa, after you have been mentioned, being the politician, what is your take from what has been said? Do you really influence politics for the sake of your bellies and that of your colleagues and perhaps contemporaries?
The answer is yes, and here's why. We, as politicians, are elected by the people on trust, through a vote. And that trust is only sustained solely to protect the interest of Malawians. So I'm going to explain. You give me 2 minutes on this. All Malawians are taxpayers. Okay, so we put money in a pot, and then we elect a president who should run that particular pot. Based on trust. We are putting tax also on trust. What happens? The system of government is designed to help the president. That is why the president appoints all the ministers, the president appoints all the CEOs. Because the belief is that the president is going to be a person of highest integrity. He will have a lot of values. He will not be a corrupt person. He will speak tough against corruption. He will have high ethics or standards. That is how the system is designed. That is, and it is not wrong. The president needs to control who can do this here, who can do that here. But there is a challenge, because if I become a president of this country today, I know Feston has been a good friend of mine for some time. He knows procurement. I'll take him to Ministry of Agriculture, for example, to be a procurement officer there, on trust. But Feston, for him to continue working at even Central Medical Stores, because I'll give him a contract, he will need to have that contract renewed after 4 years. That's what happens. So what I will do, if I'm not a straightforward person, I will pull his leg indirectly. I'll say, first of all, I'm sending someone there. Can you see what you can do with that particular person? That's what we do. That is the challenge that we give these people. That's what we do. So, when in future we're going to have this kind of engagement, that what do we need in a leader? Because most of these people are leaders, but they're not actually leaders. What is real leadership that we want? To save the Malawians that have actually put us there. Do we do that as leaders, as politicians? We don't. Just to look at what Bakili Munuza said, if I know Malawi Congress Party is going to win and I'm a business person, I will invest my 50 million in the party. I will buy a party cloth. I will expect business in return. There's no way as a business person I will just invest that money there. That is why this brings us to the issue that we are arguing with the Indians and all. Because those guys are good at giving these politicians a lot of money. Now when the politicians get the office, what do? They have to repay. Because there was an investment that happened. So to answer your question, yes, we do influence, but that is not what we're supposed to do. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's continue. It's an interesting topic. But at some point, I'll have to engage you for your comments, your questions, and whether you need to get clarification at the end of the day. But it's a very interesting topic. Okay, I want to get to Dr. Feston Kaupa. Are we not only being modest? I would have asked, anyway, I'll ask at the end of this, I'll ask Aubrey from MIPS to say who designed this particular topic, because I feel like you were trying to be modest and polite and diplomatic for this topic, because you should have just said dealing with corruption in the award of contracts. Because when you have used it, dealing with the political influence in the award of contracts, we are being kind of modest. Because we cannot, anyway, I just want to bring to you, we can debate, they can debate. The Transparency International, this is a global coalition against corruption, defines corruption as the abuse of entrusted power for private gain. It categorizes corruption in 3 segments: grand corruption, political corruption, and petty corruption. Let me get to the definitions just for a minute. Political corruption, the manipulation of policies, institutions, and rules of procedure in the allocation of resources and financing by political decision makers who abuse their position to sustain power, status, and wealth. That's the definition of political corruption. Does it sync or suit well with the topic we are discussing here? Does it? Exactly. That is why I say the crafting of this particular topic was a bit modest and diplomatic. If it were me, I would simply say dealing with corruption in the world of contracts. Let me get to the second definition of grand corruption. Grand corruption is defined by the Transparency International as acts committed at the high level of government that distort policies or the functioning of the state, thereby enabling leaders to benefit at the expense of the public good. When we're talking about public goods, we're talking about roads, hospitals, better schools, better social amenities, and the rest. Things that benefit a greater good of the nation. So when this grand corruption is at play, the rest of these public goods are distorted, are forsaken. The last one is petty corruption. The TI defines petty corruption as everyday abuse of entrusted power by law and mid-level public officials in the interaction with citizens who often are trying to access basic services like hospitals, schools, police departments, and other agencies. I think we can put this aside, but here we have to deal with grant corruption and the political corruption. These are the best definitions that suit our discussion today. Dr. Feston Kaopa, these two definitions of political corruption and grant corruption, do they anywhere fit within the equation of our discussion today?
Thank you very much. Yes, they do. And I'll start from your observation on how the topic was coached.
Yes.
Dealing with political influence in awarding of contracts. Then when I was also researching, I was like, what does this really mean? And then, from where I started from, I was talking about political influence as being derived from the control and the power that politicians do have, which they generate from the electorate. When I tried to unpack this topic, then I understood it like we are expected to discuss how we can handle the power and the control that the people in government, particularly people from the governing political parties, do have. So taking a cue from honorable people here to say, yes, politicians influence award of contracts, and resonating the same with what Mr. Jege said, yes, this is a problem that we have, and we'll live with it. Yes. So the question should be, how do we handle this power that comes from the politicians that we elect? I therefore again zero into what Mr. Zonzi said. This leaves the public procurement, particularly the public procurement. I'll also touch on the private procurement specialists. This now leaves the public procurement officers that are here very, very vulnerable, because they are forced, or not forced, but the example that Honorable People said, and they would over Central Medical Stores Trust, that's how they say it. And that's indeed true, because I've faced such kind of situations. And that's why Mr. Jege said the politicians sway the direction to which their awards of the contracts should be made. And the swaying is kind of latent. You'll not see it, but you feel it. You'll not see it because it doesn't come in writing. These are instructions that come by word of mouth. And then you are expected to execute those instructions that come by word of mouth through a contract that is written. And that is why we see that most of the procurement specialists are the ones that are getting into trouble. Because when they're being swayed, they go and break the procurement law, which they're expected to safeguard. And that's where the political corruption comes in. The grant corruption comes in. And taking your own way to say we hang the goat killer and the goat stealers and leave, you said we elect the politicians into the high offices. Yes. That's exactly where we are at. And I think that's the topic, that's the issue that we need to discuss. And this therefore leaves the obligation on the procurement specialists, because we are supposed to be the gatekeepers of the procurement law. And we do go and act on verbal instructions, which end up putting us in trouble. And when you get into trouble, you see the politicians literally running away from you. Because you can't get to them to say, look, Honorable, you said I should see how I can assist that gentleman. And in Agumba Nimachuguru, then I assisted. But here now I'm in trouble. They will never pick up your call. I'm not saying he's never pick up my call, but they will never. I'm sure some of us here might have had these examples. They will never pick up your call. They will never get any close to you when you get in trouble because you were swayed to award the contract toward their direction when you pretty well know that they never deserved it. So as gatekeepers, it is our responsibility, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, to be the first people that should be seen to be safeguarding this law. There are challenges. Why challenges? Because oftentimes we always want to safeguard our positions. He mentioned the issue of the contracts. All right, I'm on contract. Then the one who is sending this person who didn't do an church die is the one that I expected to renew my contract. And perhaps this will be happening when my contract is 4 months away for renewal. then you want to try to see that, yeah, let me pray well so that I get my contract renewed. Forgetting that you're getting yourself into trouble. It was said yesterday, I think by Honorable Kantugule, to say that we are responsible, and maybe we may not necessarily be pointing our fingers at the politicians. We're supposed to be the first ones that should be telling the politicians what to do. And there are so many ways that we can do that. We make them make mistakes at times because we don't get them informed of what they need to do. We should be brave enough to say no to some of the things and face the consequences. If we say no to some of the things and face the consequences, we should be able to look up to the institute to protect us. Because the institute is there to safeguard the professionalism of procurement specialists in the country. Let me stop at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gawa. Before I get to Mr. Lottie Zonzi, former Inspector General of Police and a consultant, currently, Ndava Aunena Dr. Gawa is saying public officers sometimes give ideas. Who was at the BICC last week when the Vice President was delivering the public lecture? He said, sometimes we blame politicians, but it is the public officers themselves sometimes who come and give ideas to the politicians. And who got that? I hope you did. So it's exactly what he's saying, what Dr. Gawa is saying. Sometimes we lack integrity. We'll discuss that at a later stage of this particular topic today. I want to get to Mr. Lottie Zonzi. You have worked for Malawi Police Service at the highest level one can ever think of, Inspector General of Police. What were the pieces of legislation or what are the pieces of legislation that the Malawi Police Service works with to make sure that it deals with this particular issue of influencing of contracts by politics? I understand that you once worked for this particular law enforcement agency. We cannot say, because we are faced with this particular challenge, therefore we should raise our hands and be the first to climb the roof and to say there is nothing we can do about this. You are given the authority, you have got power. There is this, what you call FIU, Financial Intelligence Authority, which has got also to be at play to make sure this particular influence does not pollute matters of procurement in this particular country. What are the things that the Malawi Police Service can do to at least alleviate this particular challenge?
One time, I was at the mortuary at Kamuzu Central Hospital. My boss, an Inspector General, had just been removed 3 days earlier. A minister who was at that funeral approached me and said, "Your boss has been removed. We never know. You might get the opportunity to be picked for his position." The only advice I can give you is that people are appointed to that position to help the political leadership in fulfilling certain political programs. And this doesn't come every day. So keep that in mind. Really, the story was, you are there to protect our interests. And one of the major things that has happened is that the public officer has been disempowered in this country. The roles that ministers are playing today, for example, some of the roles they have taken on themselves are the roles of a principal secretary. Any officer in a government ministry who is lower than a principal secretary was supposed to have zero interaction with a government minister. Public officers have been disempowered. Some of their power has been taken away by ministers. And that has made political influence to increase. 2 years ago, I met a former accountant general, former auditor general. This gentleman was lucky to have held those two positions. He was once accountant general and he was once auditor general. I meet him and he says, "What are you doing?" I'm saying, "Well, I just came back on holiday." He says, "Oh, I thought you were back into the country. I would have asked you to join me." I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "I am currently auditing local authorities." I asked him this question: what has gone wrong? His response to me was, "Mr. Johnson, the laws, the Financial Management Act, all the accounting laws have no problem." I said, "What?" He says, "We are going to waste our time trying to revise and update these laws. These laws have no problem." Secondly, he said to me, "IFMIS as a system has no problem." And then I said, "Then what's the problem?" He said, "The problem is the problem of our hearts, both as public servants and those people that are people of influence. So when you talk about laws, really we might get down to a situation where we realize the laws in themselves have no problem.
Yes.
They have no problem. But then I want to complicate this discussion further. Does this political influence only come from politicians? Political influence also comes from institutional politics. Within the public or private institutions, there is institutional politics. That also puts pressure for those that are responsible for procurement to make decisions in particular directions. Apart from that institutional politics, there is also professional politics. This is the way internal auditors are supposed to conduct themselves. So if you are an internal auditor and you are saying, "No, I can't," you have the pressure from the fellow auditors. You have the pressure from the fellow procurement officers. Let me just give you an example from the influence that you get institutionally from auditors. You know that when auditors from the Auditor General's office go to audit a ministry or department, it doesn't matter where that ministry or department office is. Even if it's a city center where audit office is, they will still be paid allowances by the institution they are auditing. If that institution doesn't pay them the allowances, they know the report that is going to come. So, whilst we are talking about that influence that comes from politicians, political influence in procurement also comes from institutional politics. You know, you are a procurement officer, you know the big boss in that organization will want the procurement to go in this direction, and it's not consistent with the provisions of procurement. You know that my counterparts in the internal procurement committee will expect us to go this way. So the influence is more than from politicians. It is quite broad. But the law many times is okay.
Thank you very much.
The only problem I have with the Procurement Act is on the issue of gifts.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Lotison. I hope the MIPS Secretariat is taking notes. He has mentioned very pertinent issues here. He's talked about the law being correct. There is nothing wrong with the law is just correct. When I stand here, I don't speak from myself. I always speak from the knowledge fund that I've acquired over the years. I've been working in this field. I want to corroborate in a minute what he has said. He has said the law has got nothing wrong when it comes to making sure that we do what is right in matters of procurement or in dealing with matters of corruption in the country. In 2013, I hope you remember, Justice Resident Zigamanda once worked as the director of the Anti-Corruption Bureau. I had an opportunity to chat to him on TV. Frankly, he is one honest gentleman that I respect. I think he doesn't mince words, soft-spoken, straight to the point. I asked him the very same question which I've asked Mr. Lotison. Do you think the laws of Malawi are enough or have got enough teeth to bite when people abuse and misuse power? Justice Resident Zigamanda said there is nothing wrong with the laws. We have got enough and we have got a flurry of laws in the country to protect the public peace. He started enumerating one by one. We have got the Public Audit Act, Public Finance Management Act, we have got the National Audit Act, we have got the Corrupt Practices Act, we have got the Assets Declarations Act, we have got the Public Procurement and Disposal of Assets Act. All these, though they are not exhaustive, meant to protect the public peace. But still, you find that leakages and distortions